Hey guys, tonight we're drifting down the Nile. The water glimmers gold under a slow, rising sun, the air warm and soft against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a fisherman calls out to his crew, his voice low, almost swallowed by the rivers. Hush. And then you notice it's gliding through the water toward you. A long, narrow boat, its prow tipped with two dark eyes. They're not blinking, of course they're painted, but they seem to follow you in that strange way only painted eyes can. It's a look that's part welcome, part warning, and part I'm watching you. Probably wouldn't survive one of these journeys without some divine intervention between crocodiles. Sudden storms and sand-laden winds. The Nile is less gentle than it looks in tourist brochures. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and I'd love to know. Where you're watching from, drop your location and the local time down in the comments now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins before the heat settles in. You're standing on a narrow, muddy bank, sandals dusted with fine silt, watching the first ripples of traffic on the river. The Nile is the heartbeat of the land, stretching in a ribbon of life through the desert's bone-dry ribs. There's no bread, no beer, no empire, just silence and sand. But with it, cities, temples, markets, and boats. Always boats. The one before you now is a felucca, a small, sturdy craft meant for navigating the Nile's bends and moods. Its sail is furled for the moment, but the eyes on its prow stare ahead, as if the journey has already begun. About how this isn't just decoration. In Egypt, everything has meaning. Symbols are as much a part of daily life as bread and beer. These eyes aren't there to impress tourists. There are no tourists in your time-traveling mental stroll. They're here to protect. A breeze comes from the west, ruffling the papyrus that leans over the bank like green spears. Somewhere upstream, a barge loaded with limestone is making its slow way toward a building site. Never see the pharaoh's face, but the stone they're ferrying could end up under his feet or above his head for eternity. And there, Botius would likely have eyes too. Not just to see, but to be seen. You're told the locals believe the river has its moods. Sometimes its creatures have their opinions about travelers. The painted gaze can help. It's like giving the boat a way to watch for trouble, to spot shifting currents, to see what the human crew might miss. Historians still argue whether the eyes began purely as a practical superstition or as part of religious symbolism tied to gods like Horus, the ever-watchful falcon. Either way, the result is the same. The prow watches forward while you, the passenger, can relax, dash mostly in the early light. The river smells of wet clay and faint sweetness, maybe from lotus blooms opening with the day. In the distance, you can see low shapes along the banks, the silhouettes of huts and fishing nets strung up to dry. Smoke curls from a cooking fire, and you imagine someone roasting tilapia caught before dawn. It's a peaceful scene, but you remember the warnings. Crocodiles still lurk in certain stretches, and the shallows hide sandbanks ready to snag a careless keel. The boat's captain, a wiry man with skin the deep brown of sun-warmed walnut, nods toward the eyes on the prow, as if to say, they'll keep us safe. You can't help but wonder if he believes it, or if it's simply tradition, something you don't question, like putting on both sandals before leaving home. In this place, the old ways survive not because they're unbreakable rules, but because they're part of the river's rhythm. You step onto the deck. It rocks slightly under your weight, the wood warm from yesterday's sun. The eyes seem closer now, large enough that you notice tiny flecks of pigment missing from the lashes of years of journeys. Paint touched and retouched, maybe. After each flood season, it's here, standing at the bow, that you start to feel how the river is both a road and a mirror. It carries you forward, but also reflects you back. The eyes, painted and patient, are part of that reflection. They remind you that someone, long ago, stood exactly where you are, trusting that a little paint and a lot of faith could keep danger at bay. As the sail is raised and the felucca catches the wind, you glance down at the waterline. The river glitters with shifting sunbursts, The air smells faintly of resin from the wooden hull. And somewhere below, fish flash like coins tossed by an unseen hand. The boat's gaze stays fixed ahead, unblinking. As if already sensing the next bend in the Nile, the morning stretches on, and you lean against the railing, letting the soft slap of water against wood become your metronome. The rhythm is slow, patient, reassuring. A heron lifts from the reeds, wings slicing the air in complete silence, and for a moment, you imagine the eyes on the prow following it, keeping watch over more than just the route. Maybe they see omens, or maybe they're just watching for a nice breeze to fill the sail. Either way, the message is clear. You are not alone on this river. You never are. We'll see what you can't. They will look for currents you don't. Feel for dangers you don't suspect. And as the day warms and the wind steadies, you find yourself trusting them just a little enough to loosen your grip on the railing and let your gaze wander to the horizon. The felucca shifts under your feet as the crew moves about, their bare soles making soft thuds on the wooden planks. You can smell the faint tang of river mud clinging to the ropes and hear the muted creak of the mast as the sail catches more wind. Ahead, the horizon is low and hazy, and the two painted eyes keep their steady, unblinking watch. You wonder, do they see further than you? Or is it just that you want them to? The captain gestures for you to sit near the bow where the breeze is strongest. As you settle onto a coiled rope, you notice the eyes are not perfectly symmetrical. One seems just slightly narrower than the other, the brushstrokes a bit sharper. It's not a mistake, it's deliberate. You remember overhearing a dockhand say the left eye watches the river ahead, while the right eye guards the world beyond, in case the spirits of the dead decide to take an interest in the living. Historians still argue whether that's an ancient belief or just one of those dockside tales invented to pass the time. But it's the sort of detail that makes you want to believe it. The sun rises higher, turning the water from gold to a hard, dazzling silver. A fisherman in a smaller canoe paddles past, his boat also bearing eyes, simpler, cruder, but still there. He lifts a hand in greeting, and you think about how every craft on this river, from the humblest skiff to the grandest barge, carries this mark. It's like the Nile's own silent handshake. Eyes forward, always watching. Your gaze drifts too. The sail above you patched in a few places with mismatched linen. The mast sways slightly with each gust, and the ropes creak like old bones. The crew moves with easy familiarity, adjusting tension here, tying off there, every gesture economical. One young deckhand catches you studying the eyes and grins. "They keep us from going blind," he says, his tone half joking. Then he adds, "And they see trouble before it finds us." You lean over the side and watch the water swirl in the felucca's wake. The ripples distort the reflection of the eyes, making them seem to blink lazily as the boat cuts through the current. For a moment, you imagine you are the boat feeling the wind in your sail, like breath in your chest, your painted eyes open to whatever the river offers next. As the day unfolds, felucca threads between other vessels' wide cargo boats loaded. With clay jars, narrow fishing craft skimming the edges of reed beds, each one has its own style of gaze, some wide and bright, others stern and narrow, a few adorned with lashes or decorative swirls. It's like a parade of expressions. It's gliding silently along the same watery road. The captain tells you the eyes are painted fresh before each flood season, and the Nile swells and the currents change. It's a ritual as much as maintenance. Old paint is scraped away, pigments are ground from minerals, red from ochre, black from soot, white from crushed shells, and mixed with oils to make them last. Sometimes charms are whispered during the painting, a prayer for safe voyages. In fair winds, historians still argue whether these boat eyes originated here or were adopted from seafaring neighbors. Some point to the Phoenicians, who also painted eyes on their ships. Others say the Egyptians were first, their traditions later spreading outward. Standing here watching the painted pupils pierce the horizon, you think it doesn't really matter. Whoever started it, the meaning has deepened into something the river itself seems to understand. The heat builds, and you slip into the shade of the sail. A warm gust brushes past, carrying the smell of distant cooking fires. Somewhere upstream, temple bells or something like them ring faintly. The sound carries over the water, thin, but clear. As though even the gods want to be sure the eyes are paying attention, the young Deccan reappears with a clay cup of cool water, dipping. It's straight from a jar lashed near the mast. You drink slowly, the taste faintly earthy, and watch as he moves toward the bow, running his fingers lightly along the painted lines. It's almost tender, like checking a friend's face for signs of wear. You wonder if this is habit or superstition, though? Here, the two are often the same thing. You shift your attention back to the banks. The land here is low and green, with palm fronds swaying in lazy arcs. A pair of ibis wade near the shallows, their long beaks dipping for food. The eyes on the prow seem to aim straight toward them, as if the boat itself is curious. That's the thing, you know, it's just pigment and wood. But it's easy to project personality onto those eyes. As the wind picks up, the felucca leans slightly into its course. You can feel the river's subtle push beneath you, the boat, gliding in harmony with the current. The captain hums a low tune, something repetitive and soothing, the kind of sound that belongs to long hours at the helm. You find yourself humming along without knowing the words. When you glance forward again, the eyes catch the light in a way that makes them almost glow. You realize they've been your quiet companions all morning, steady in their vigilance. Not that you trust them to literally see, but their presence makes you feel seen, guarded, part of something older than you can quite name. By the time the sun tilts past noon, you're certain of one thing: you'll never look at a boat's prow the same way again. The afternoon light shifts to something warmer, softer, the kind of glow that makes the Nile look like a long strip of polished bronze. The felucca glides steadily, the water curling away from the prow in gentle waves. The eyes remain unblinking, fixed on the path ahead, as if reading the river's thoughts before they're spoken. A crewman named Nebbit squats beside you, idly coiling rope as he talks. He tells you the eyes are more than tradition, they are talismans, a shield against what you can't predict. In the stories passed down by his grandfather, the Nile is alive, a god and a serpent, all at once. It's willing to carry you home if you respect it, but equally willing to swallow you if you forget your place. The eyes, Nebbot says, remind the river that you are alert, that you are watching too. It's a conversation between human and water. The scholarly part of your mind wants to file this away under ancient superstition, but another part, the part swayed by the steady rhythm of the current, wants to lean in and listen. Historians still argue whether the eyes were primarily religious symbols or protective magic. But here on the deck, the line between the two feels blurry at best. The boat creaks as the wind eases for a moment, and the captain adjusts the tiller with an easy flick of his wrist. The sail shifts, catching just enough breeze to keep you moving. Odd. The heat has mellowed into a dry, pleasant warmth, and you can hear the slap of small waves against the hull. Every so often, a fish leaps, the flash of its scales catching the sun like a coin tossed into the air. Nebbot leans closer and adds, something unexpected. Sometimes the eyes aren't just for protection. They're for guidance. In thick morning fog, or under a moonless night, when the river ahead disappears into a blur, sailors believe the eyes can see what human eyes cannot. It's not that the painted gaze pierces the dark, it's that it reminds the crew to trust their instincts, to feel the boat's alignment with the current. It's as if the boat itself participates in the journey. You think about the shape of the eyes. They're not drawn like human eyes exactly. They have a stylized curve, more like the eye of Horus you've seen carved into temple walls. It's symbol known, as the wedget was said to restore health, protect against evil, and offer divine sight. Could the prow's eyes be an extension of that belief? A way to give the vessel a guardian's vision? The idea sticks with you as the felucca passes a cluster of papyrus rafts tied together near the bank. Each raft also has a crude set of eyes daubed near the bow, the paint barely holding on to the reeds. You can tell the work is hasty, but it's there nonetheless, a quick nod to tradition before setting out. Even the smallest, simplest craft claims the right to be seen by the river. In the distance, a larger barge approaches, its hull low in the water under the weight of stone blocks. The eyes on its prow are enormous, nearly as tall as a man, painted in bold strokes that would be visible from far downriver. There's something almost intimidating about them. A reminder that in ancient Egypt, ships were not just transport, they were statements. A vessel carrying goods for a temple or a royal project might be expected to radiate power and divine favor. The eyes, in that sense, are more than protective. They're declarative. This ship matters. You lean back, letting the sound of the wind fill the quiet spaces between thoughts. The sun glints off the water, and the smell of the river, mineral rich, green, and faintly sweet, hangs in the air. Somewhere a bird calls with a sound like two hollow wooden flutes played together. The painted eyes seem to listen. It occurs to you that the placement of the eyes is as important as their design. They're always near the prow, never hidden away. They face forward because a journey is about where you're going, not where you've been. That's true for boats, and perhaps for people too. The crew might glance back at the receding banks, but the boat's face never does. Nabat finishes coiling his rope and sets it aside. He tells you of one voyage when his father was caught. In a sudden sandstorm that swept across the river, the sky turned a dull red and visibility dropped to nothing. His father swore the only thing that kept the crew from panicking was the sight of those painted eyes, unwavering and calm in the chaos, as if they knew the way. Whether it was divine guidance or just a psychological anchor, it worked. They made it to shore without losing a man. Historians might dismiss that as coincidence. But standing here now, you're not so sure. You've been watching those eyes for hours, and they've become a kind of quiet reassurance. The way a lighthouse beam reassures a sailor in the open sea. The river narrows slightly, and the felucca adjusts course. The banks close in, and you can see details you couldn't before. Goats grazing near the waterline. A woman kneeling to fill jars. Children splashing in the shallows. They pause to watch your boat pass, and you imagine how it must look to them eyes. Gliding toward them, friendly yet mysterious. By late afternoon, the shadows stretch long across the water. The air cools, the crew's movements slow, and you feel the day settling into a softer rhythm. The eyes still watch, unwavering, holding their silent conversation with the river. You're beginning to think that maybe you're part of it, now part of this centuries-old agreement between boat, water, and the unseen. Heat gathers on your shoulders like a patient cat, settling in without asking permission. The sail swells, the felucca sighs, and you pass a scatter of fishing huts where reed roofs bow to the sun. Smoke drifts from clay ovens, thin and blue. Somewhere a pot of lentils keeps a lazy bubble. Children wave, then resume their important work of inventing games with sticks and a river that never runs out of rules. The eyes on your prow keep their even stare, and the village watches them back, an exchange of glances older than any greeting you could shout across the water. A fisherman pulls out to meet you. Surface's boat has eyes, two simple circles with a bold black dot, like a pair of surprised owls. He calls a warning about crocodiles near the bend, and though his smile is friendly, you feel your spine straighten the way a reed does when the wind shifts. You remember the captain's proud nod at the painted gaze and feel your breath loosen. Of course, the boat sees them coming. That's the point, you tell yourself. Or at least that's the story you prefer when sharp teeth are involved. Bank to your right, nets hang like translucent curtains. A woman shakes one free of river weed and tells a younger girl to knot the holes. The girl works with nimble fingers, humming a tune with 3 notes and 100 moods. When she looks up, it's not to you, it's to the prow. Keep us safe, she says to the eyes, the way you might ask a lamppost to light your way home. Habit, hope, and a little magic. Braided together like rope. There's a mainstream truth you can hold on to here. Egyptian sailors and fishermen really did lean on protective symbols, wedged amulets, tucked under tunics, scarabs scratched into wood, and yes, eyes painted where the water first meets the vessel. The eye of Horus promised health, wholeness, and a kind of vigilant seeing. Carved on coffins, inlaid on rings, brushed on prows, it is vision multiplied. You can almost feel that idea warming the planks under your feet. A boy on shore jogs alongside, keeping pace just to show that he can. He cups his hands and calls a story you've already heard once today and wouldn't mind hearing again A cousin swore a hippo rose in the reeds at dusk, and the only reason he didn't capsize was because the boat's eyes stared the beast down. You can't help smiling at the logic. Hippos are not easily shamed, but you let the tail set like sun on the water. In a world where one wrong angle means a cracked hull, confidence is a tool. If painted eyes give it, then they earn there. Keep joke 1. You decide not to tell the boy that your own strategy for hippos is be somewhere else entirely. Heat presses closer, and the river gleams so bright you squint beneath your headscarf. The captain lifts a hand to shade his brow and asks the crew to trim the sail. The boom swings with a creak like an old door retelling a secret. The eyes are made vivid again by the sudden patch of shadow. Clean lines, a steady pupil, a lash-like arc that suggests both bird and god. Historians still argue whether riverboat eyes are literal echoes of the divine wedget or a broader, patropaic habit. Habit humanity's undying fondness for drawing faces on things and hoping the faces look back. On our behalf, you glide past a cluster of poles capped with shells. Nebbit tells you they're river markers that fishermen set before dawn to find their way home at dusk. Practical. Yes, but also talismans. Shells catch light, he says. They wink at boats. Like little cousins to our big eyes, he chuckles. It's a quirky detail that sticks. The Nile, glittering with 100 tiny glances. Somewhere in your mind, you add a small note. When you decorate a path with sight, you start to believe the path sees you too. At a shallow bend, the water turns jade and then tea brown. You smell something green and gummy. Crushed papyrus and the faint cucumber-cool shade of water plants. The prow noses into slow water where crocodiles like to loaf, and everyone performs the ancient rite of pretending to be casual. The captain hums. Nabat ties a knot he tied 5 minutes ago, purely for morale. You practice the advanced meditation technique known as not thinking about crocodiles. Joke 2, spoiler, it doesn't work. A flash of movement in the reeds only. A bird, long-legged, indignant about your gust of wind, but your heart has already stepped onto a very tiny sprinting track. The eyes do not flinch. Their calm becomes contagious, and you realize that from the deck they are less painting and more posture, the posture of looking forward. You match it a little. You let your breath lengthen. The crew stops pretending and actually relaxes. Your boat's face has set the mood. A small boy at another landing holds up a string of amulets for sale. Faience fish. Little Bess heads with lion manes. And, yes, tiny eyes on cord. He claims the blue glaze was baked with river water at the new moon, so it remembers the way back. The claim is marketing, obviously, but you feel the tug of the story. Memory, vision, return. These are the quiet verbs of a river life. You buy an eye you don't need because the sentence it carries is useful. Safe. Passage is a thing you can hang around your neck. You drift by a shrine set back from the waterline. Just a mud brick niche with a clay figure inside. Has painted 2 dots beside it, high and neat. They look like punctuation. Maybe that's all they are. A call-in to introduce each new day. A pair of eyes to watch the words you will write on the river with your wake. Historians still argue whether such shrines served fishermen's guilds or local household gods. Your vote tonight is both, because the prayers here are humble and immediate. Let the net be kind, let the river be generous. Let the boat see trouble first, the mainstream and the magical keep, threading through the afternoon. Mainstream. Crocodiles once ranged widely along the Nile. Ancient texts mention them matter vaguely among the hazards of travel, along with sandbars and contrary winds. Magical. Some villages kept crocodile mummies in little chapels. Offerings laid neatly before them, respect paid to a neighbor you cannot evict. You picture a priest tidying a crocodile's linen as if smoothing a tablecloth, and you can't help but smile at the domesticity of it all. Joke 3. You briefly imagine the chore list: fetch water, sweep floor, dust crocodile. By late day, the sunlight has an almond sheen, soft enough to relax even the nervous notes in your chest. A woman at the water's edge washes a basket and tells you, without stopping her rhythm, that the eyes make boats lucky at dawn and brave at dusk. Morning is for seeing, she says, "Evening is for being seen." It feels like a proverb you should tuck in your pocket for some future day. Far from Egypt, the crew rigs a small awning over the bow. The shade makes the eyes gleam like polished stone. You find yourself tracing their lines in the air with a fingertip upper curve like a falcon's lid, lower line like the riverbank itself, pupil steady as a pole star that never once bothers to blink. The design is not random. It rehearses a sacred geometry you've been sailing inside all afternoon. Somewhere behind you, a boy laughs. Somewhere ahead, a jar breaks with a soft chuff. The river holds both sounds and releases them as if they were leaves. Your boat carries its old ritual forward, and you carry it with you, that steadying trick of drawing watchfulness where fear might otherwise sit. You won't say the eyes are magic here, crew willing yet, as a breeze freshens and the prow leans toward the bend beyond the crocodile reeds. You are quietly glad the boat is looking where you are going. The air shifts, and with it the sound of the river. It's quieter now, as though the banks themselves are listening. The felucca moves into a broader stretch where the current slows, and the view opens like the unrolling of a papyrus scroll. On the far shore, palaces and temples gleam in the afternoon light, their columns white and gold, banners snapping in the breeze. Somewhere behind those walls, the pharaoh's voice can command 100 ships with a single word. You imagine what his fleet must look like when the Nile is his staged dozens of barges, each longer than a city block, sails dyed in royal colors, decks crowded with guards, priests, and musicians. And at the prow of each, his eyes, not the modest ovals you've seen on fishing boats, but great sweeping shapes edged in lapis pigment and gold leaf. Eyes that are less about seeing and more about being seen. The captain notices your gaze and tells you, the pharaoh's ceremonial barges weren't just for travel, they were moving proclamations. When one passed, it wasn't only the man on board who commanded respect. It was the entire vessel, radiating the weight of the state. The painted eyes in this context were more than guardians. They were declarations of divine favor. If the pharaoh was the son of Ra, then his ship was an extension of the sun god's gaze. Watching over the Nile and all who sailed it, historians still argue whether the eyes on royal ships were purely symbolic or also served the same protective role as those on common vessels. Some point out that on days of grand processions, danger was minimal. Others suggest that even the most protected ruler might need supernatural insurance. After all, the river doesn't care for titles. The crew slows the felucca to let a royal barge pass. You watch as rowers in white linen keep time with a slow drum beat, each stroke perfect, almost meditative. The eyes on their prow seem alive in the shifting light, catching glints from the water as if they are blinking approval.
Ow.
You find yourself staring back, and for a moment it feels like the boat sees you, a common traveler among its many subjects. It's not just the paint that's striking, it's the placement and framing. The eyes are set high, angled slightly upward, as if they're scanning the horizon for omens. Gold lines arc around them like halos. The symbolism is layered gold for the sun, upward gaze for divine guidance. The whole effect meant to signal power that flows from the gods down through the pharaoh, through the boat, and into the Nile. Itself, a passing deckhand leans in to tell you about one particular barge used for the Opet festival in Thebes. It was said to carry the god Amun's statue upriver to Luxor temple. The eyes on that vessel were carved into the wood before being painted, giving them a relief you could feel under your hand. Sailors believe that carving made the vision permanent, even if the paint faded. It's one of those quirky details you can't quite dismiss. It's practical and mystical all at once. The felucca keeps pace behind the barge for a while, the drumbeat fading into the creak of your own sail. You notice the difference between your vessel's eyes and the royal ones. Yours are simpler, almost conversational, like a friend scanning the road ahead. The royal eyes are formal, distant, performing their watchfulness for the benefit of the crowd as much as for the journey. In a moment of whimsy, you imagine what it would be like if all the painted eyes along the Nile could see each other little. Fishing boats glancing shyly at the grand barges, merchant vessels giving curt nods, royal ships sweeping past like they owned the water. Maybe they do. The sun lowers and shadows spill across the river. The captain steers you closer to shore, where the wake of the barge won't rock you. The air smells faintly of incense drifting from the temple steps. You picture the pharaoh disembarking, his feet touching the dock just as the last light catches the prow's eyes, sealing the impression that he is both man and more than man. Nabat, never far from a story, tells you about an old tale where a royal barge, left unattended overnight, drifted downriver. By morning, it was found moored neatly at its home dock, the eyes facing forward as if nothing had happened. Sailors swore it had found its own way back. Historians dismiss it as legend, but Nebbit just shrugs and says, "A boat with eyes never gets lost." We sit back, letting the image settle the grand vessels. The smaller craft, all part of a visual language that has stretched for centuries. The eyes are more than decoration. They're conversation, a way for the Nile's people to speak to the river, and for the river, perhaps to speak back as the light fades further. You think about the connection between the eyes and the way Egyptians viewed life itself as a journey, often by water, watched over by God's ancestors and unseen forces. The prow's gaze is a reminder that someone or something is guiding you. Even if you can't see the path yourself, the royal barge is now just a dark shape in the distance. Its gold catching the last stubborn rays of the sun. Your own boat, humbler, but no less determined, keeps its eyes forward. Somewhere beyond the bend lies another village, another story, another pair of painted pupils fixed on the future. By the time your felucca noses into the dockyard, the air tastes of sawdust and hot resin, with a little temps of the river folded in, like salt on a bakery crust. The shore is a puzzle of ramps and trestles, hulls propped up like sleeping crocodiles. With their bellies showing, planks ribbed and breathing in the heat, you step onto boards that thunk underfoot, and all at once you're inside a slow symphony. Mallets tap, adzes rasp, rope fibers sing as they're twisted, and somewhere a pot of pitch gives a polite burp. The painted eyes waiting to be born are still ghosts on bare wood, sketched in faint red that only the artisans seem to see. A master painter raises a hand-thin wrist. Steady fingers, forearm dusted with chalk and motions you closer. He works. At a low bench, where pigments glow in shallow dishes, red ochre like baked clay, carbon black, powdered fine as night, a pale gypsum white, green ground from malachite, and there, the small miracle Egyptian blue, the world's first synthetic pigment, a tiny pile of sky in a bowl. He touches each color as a baker might touch flour, assessing mood and texture, then tips a little into a shell where a binder waits. Gum Arabic today, he tells you sap, from acacia though, animal glue, sometimes, makes a cameo when the weather is fickle. He lifts a reed brush, whose tip has been chewed just enough to bloom into a soft point. The wood of the prow is warm under his palm. Before any paint, he walks you through the ritual. Scrape the old flakes away with a copper blade, rub the surface with sandstone to take splinters down to a whisper, then lay a thin ground of calcite. So the colors will sit as calmly as a cat on a wall. Only after the wall is tempered does the eye open. The first marks are not black. He sketches with red, just as tomb painters do guidelines that map the curve of lid, the tilt of brow, the exact size of the pupil. The red is a rehearsal, a breath before speaking. You can see the geometry hidden in the gesture. The lower line takes its measure from the width of the plank. The upper curve echoes a falcon's arc. The pupil sits on a tiny, invisible crosshair, so it won't wander off like a daydreaming apprentice. Historians still argue whether shipyards used an official canon of proportions, a state-approved boat face, or whether each workshop carried its own style like a family recipe. Standing here, you suspect it's both. Tradition with a little swagger at the edges. Behind you, carpenters fit a new plank with wooden dowels, tapping them in with a rhythm that rivals a lullaby. Resin warms in a bronze pot and threads the air with pine and honey. A boy stirs, careful, proud, trying not to splash. He tells you beeswax makes the sealer behave, and you nod as if you, too, routinely negotiate with liquids. You resist the urge to ask if the wax is taste tested. This is not a cooking show. and your dentist would disapprove. The painter mixes black with a little oil to make the line move like water. He leans in. The first stroke is the upper lid, a quiet dare to the hand. The second is the lower, sure and spare. Then a quick breath of lash at the outer corner. Not a flirty feather, but a sacred accent that says, I see. The pupil comes. Last, placed with theatrical calm, a single dot that turns wood into watcher. He steps back, and the dockyard seems to pause along with him, as if everyone is waiting to see if the eye will blink. It doesn't, of course. It only looks, and looking is enough to change the boat's face from blank to awake. You ask about color, and the painter smiles without taking his eyes off the eye. Black for outline, yes. White to catch a gleam. Sometimes green to nod toward life. A whisper of blue when a patron can afford it. Egyptian blue, he explains, is copper and sand and lime married in a furnace hot enough to make stones forget they were once separate. Its use is practical and ceremonial at once. Blue speaks of the sky and the Nile, of protection broad as daylight. Whether it belongs on a prow or only in temples is a debate that has followed him since his apprenticeship. He shrugs and says the river seems calmer when it sees itself reflected. Another artisan arrives with a basket of shells and a jar of beer. The shells are for mixing natures, measuring cup sand. The beer is for thinning pigment on hot afternoons. You raise an eyebrow? He grins. For the paint, he says, and then, after a beat, mostly, joke too. You silently vow to never drive a felucca after happy hour. He dips a finger and flicks a microdot of blue at the inner corner of the eye, a glint so subtle you'd miss it if you blinked. Boats look smarter with a secret. He adds, on the hull nearby, someone has chalked a little Vespucci leonine, tongue out where the planks meet. A shipwright explains that the figure is there to make the joints brave. Fringe, maybe. Effective. He taps the seam. It rings tight. He assures you the tongue is non-negotiable. It scares splinters away. You try not to laugh and fail. Quietly. Before. The eye can face the river. The surface gets a seal. Warm resin, brushed thin. Beeswax rubbed with a cloth until the wood glows like old amber. You rub a knuckle across the finished patch. It is slick, slightly tacky, ready to push water aside without a grudge. Mainstream fact folded neatly into the moment. Egyptian shipwrights imported cedar from the Levant for big jobs and pampered. It would oils and resins, so it would stop pretending it lived in a desert. The Nile carries commerce, but the dockyard carries forests on its shoulders. A category workshop has one hops onto the plank stack, surveys the proceedings and chooses. The painter's lap is a throne, paints around the purring obstacle with the patience of a priest. Joke 3. You consider nominating the cat as head of quality control. The stair is already management level. As the eye dries, apprentices start the second prow. You recognize the steps now? The choreography tuned by centuries scraped smooth. Ground, red sketch, black line, white gleam, maybe a shy wink of blue. You recognize, too, how the ritual shapes mood. The crew gathers just a little closer. Someone ties a knot and doesn't untie it again. Even Nebbit, who laughs at nearly everything, falls silent for the pupil. When the dot lands, a breath escapes the group like a tide going out. The boat can see. The boat is seen. The painter tells you about a superstition he doesn't entirely believe, but never ignores. If a gnat lands in the pupil while it's still wet, they start over. The boat shouldn't share its eye, he says. No hitchhikers. Quirky, yes, but as rules go, it's tidy and poetic. He flicks a gnat away from the rim and nods satisfied. The river will get a clear gaze. You drift to the edge of the dock where your felucca waits for its turn. Eyes already crisp from the last season, but due for touch-ups. The captain strokes the prow the way a person greets a friend after a long walk, then looks to the painter. No words, just a small gesture that means, make us ready. The painter lifts his brush. And you feel that gentle rehearsal of breath pass through you again. Red line. Black certainty, white whisper, blue secret. Historians still argue whether the dockyard ritual is primarily religion, in overalls, or engineering. With a soul. You stand there, sun slipping toward the roofline. Decide it's both at once. Work that hums when chanted to. Magic that respects grain and angle. The river will have its say soon. But for now, in this yard of color and craft, the watching begins with hands, with mineral ground to story. It's gum and wax and patient lines that turn planks into a face that faces forward. When the painter finally lowers his brush, the prow looks the way you wish nerves would look, steady, composed, unsurprised. The eye is dry enough to meet the river. The cat approves with a blink. The crew exhales in that quiet, communal way people do when a job snaps neatly into place. And you practice our earlier advanced technique again? The one about not thinking of crocodiles, and discover that it's easier now with a watcher riding the bow who never blinks. The felucca drifts back into the current, its freshly painted eyes catching the late afternoon light like drops of polished jet. Nabat is grinning again, the sort of grin you've come to recognize as there's a story coming, and you might not believe it. Sure enough, he leans on the railing and says, we're not the only ones who do this. You already know some of it. Your mind goes straight to the Phoenicians, those master traders of the Mediterranean, whose ships also bore watchful eyes. But Nebet's not talking about vague histories. He means now, in his own time. He's met Greek sailors who paint big, bold oculi on their triremes. He's seen merchants from the Levant, their prows bearing eyes so wide they could almost pass for owls. He's even heard of ships farther east beyond, the Red Sea, that use stylized dragon eyes to frighten away spirits. It's a reminder that this painted gaze isn't just an Egyptian quirk. It's part of a bigger conversation among people who spend their lives afloat. The mainstream fact is clear. Many ancient maritime cultures embrace the idea of giving a vessel sight, often for the same blend of protection, guidance, and symbolic presence. Historians still argue whether Egypt originated the practice or borrowed it, perhaps adapting it to their own river-centered worldview. Nabat tells you about a Phoenician captain he once met in a market near Memphis. The man swore his ships' eyes had saved him in a storm off Cyprus. They saw the safe harbor before I did, he'd claimed, tapping the prow for luck. You imagine the scene, rain sheeting down, visibility reduced to a wet blur. And still, those painted pupils fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the chaos. The wind picks up, pushing the felucca along at a lazy but confident pace. Overhead, the sail snaps and sighs like it's telling its own long, slow joke. You picture a meeting of ships from different worlds, Egyptian, Greek, Phoenician, passing each other in some ancient port. No shared language needed. The eyes do the talking. Silent nod across cultures. We see you. You see us. And we both reach shore. Nabat isn't done. Points a privet toward, where the Nile widens and eventually pours into the Mediterranean. In the delta, he says, you'll see more of them.
Oh.
The river meets the sea, and everyone gets nervous. The eyes work harder there. He chuckles at his own phrasing, but you understand. The Nile is predictable compared to the open sea. Once you leave its brown-green familiarity, you're in a place where waves have moods, and horizons offer no landmarks. Historians still argue whether Egyptian seagoing ships, those venturing into the Mediterranean or Red Sea, used a different style of eyes than rivercraft. Some say the shapes were sharper, more predatory, to match the dangers of open water. Others believe the style stayed consistent, carrying the same reassuring curves, whether the prow faced crocodiles or squalls. Either way, the logic holds. Water is water, danger is danger. A painted gaze can't hurt. A squall of birds erupts from the reeds, wheeling above the deck in a sudden spiral. The eyes seem to follow them, and for a moment, you imagine there, scanning for omens in the flock's pattern, is quirky detail. Nebet swears some captains won't leave port if the first bird they see in the morning is flying away from the bow. It means the eyes will be chasing luck all day, he says. He shrugs, as though he doesn't believe it. But you've noticed he always nods to the first heron of the morning. The sail hums as the felucca leans into a fresh gust. You watch the ripples catch sunlight in moving diamonds. Somewhere behind, you, a fisherman, calls to his son in a mix of Egyptian and what sounds like Greek. The words blur, but the tone is unmistakable. A warning, softened with care. The boy's boat's maul, reed-built, eyes painted like two neat commas tethered nearby, rocking gently in the wind's pool. It's then you realize the eyes serve another purpose that no one bothers to debate. They make boats recognizable. In a crowded harbor or a foggy river bend, an eye shape, size, color can mark ownership the way a painted crest might on land. That's a practical bonus, and you suspect many a sailor has found his boat in a crush of holes by spotting her gaze first. You lean back against the rail, letting the steady sway of the deck do some of the thinking for you. The Egyptian eyes feel grounded in the rhythm of the Nile broad lines. Protective curves, while the Greek versions you've seen sketched on pots are sharper, angled like a spearhead. The Phoenician style, if Nebot's memories are accurate, splits the difference, bold but rounded, as if trying to appeal to both river gods and sea spirits. The felucca drifts into a stretch where the banks are low and open, the land flat enough to let the horizon run for miles. The eyes on the prow seem bigger against all that emptiness. You imagine them catching the glint of another vessel hours before your human eyes can. It's not logical, but logic isn't the only tool you use when you're out on the water. The sun dips lower, staining the river copper. Nebot tells one last cross-cultural tale before heading to help with the ropes, in a port far west. He once saw a ship with no eyes. It belonged to a captain who trusted his own sight more than any paint. A week later, the story goes, that ship ran aground on a sandbank that every local knew to avoid. He laughed at our eyes, Nebot says, tightening a knot, but the river laughed last. Glance forward again to the bold pupils on your own prow and find you don't mind the superstition one bit. In a world where even the gods are known to take river cruises, it's nice to have a pair of companions, staring out for you whether they're borrowing their style from Egypt, Greece, or somewhere farther than your mind can yet sail. The wind smells different as you edge north, less of warm silt and sunlit reeds, more of open water and salt just barely there in the air. The Nile begins to loosen its grip, widening into fingers that braid and unbraid themselves toward the Mediterranean. The sky feels taller here, the clouds brighter, the horizon less forgiving. Even the felucca's crew moves differently, checking ropes twice, squinting ahead as though the river's manners might suddenly change. The eyes on your prow seem sharper in this light. Fresh paint catches the glare like polished obsidian, the pupils pointed straight into the widening channel ahead. Nebot mutters something about how the river looks sideways at you here, and you think he means the current is trickier, but you glance at the eyes anyway, wondering if they're already tracking whatever trouble might be riding the tide. Mainstream. The Nile Delta's waters are notoriously unpredictable. Channels shift after floods, sandbanks hide just beneath the surface, and eddies can grab a hull with more determination than any crocodile. Historians still argue whether ancient pilots relied more on visual markers like temple spires and tall palms or on the boat's vision through painted eyes to navigate these shifting passages. In truth, both could matter when every bend might be different from last season's map in your head. Villages are sparser here, set back from the water to avoid seasonal flooding. Those you do pass have docks built high and sturdy, often with thick wooden posts crowned by carved symbols. You spot a dock where each post bears its own painted eye, staring out like a row of quiet sentries. A fisherman tells you they're meant to greet passing boats and warn away spirits that might try to follow them in. It's an odd thought that even the land here paints eyes toward the water, as if returning the gaze. A broad sandbar forces you into a narrower channel. The water changes color greener. Clouded with stirred-up sediment tanned, the felucca slows. The crew's conversation drops to a murmur. One man adjusts the sail so the boat drifts just fast enough to keep steerage. The eyes stay steady, unblinking, and you realize you've started checking them like you would a compass, as though they might twitch if you were in danger. Nebot tells you that in the Delta. The eyes have another layer of meaning. They're not only guardians, but negotiators. The sea doesn't know the Nile, he says, and the Nile doesn't know the sea. The eyes talk for us. It's a poetic idea, but also a practical one. Mariners heading out need luck on their side. Those coming in need the river's blessing. The as if you believe in such things act as ambassadors. Between the two realms, The felucca glides past a cluster of reed islands. Birds rise from them in startled bursts, and you notice the crew watching closely for telltale ripples. Sometimes, hippos wander this far, the captain murmurs. He thought they preferred the calmer stretches upstream, but he insists it's not impossible. Joke 1. You decide that if a hippo really is out here, it's probably just on vacation, and you wish it a pleasant stay. Historians still argue whether seagoing. Egyptians modified their eyes for the journey, adding brighter colors to stand out against the blue-gray of open water, or painting them larger for visibility in distant harbors. Fragments of ancient ship remains have been found with traces of pigment in places that match where riverboat eyes would be, but the evidence is patchy. You imagine that, like most things, style would depend on the captain's beliefs and the shipwright's habits. A sudden gust spins the sail. The captain reacts instantly, hauling the tiller and shouting for the crew to shift weight. The boat steadies, but you feel your pulse race. You glance forward, and those painted eyes seem as calm as ever, tracking straight ahead. You wonder if that's the real magic. No matter how you feel, they never flinch. In the late afternoon, the delta light turns honey-colored, and the air grows heavy with the smell of marsh plants. In the far distance, you catch a glimpse of another vessel, larger, with 2 masts sliding in from the sea. Its eyes are different, wider, with thick black outlines and a dash of red in each corner. You try to read their expression, but settle on confident. The way a seasoned traveler looks stepping off a boat. They've ridden 100 times before. The 2 vessels pass close enough for greetings. There's no common tongue here, just a few shouted words that dissolve into the wind. But both crews glance at the other ship's prow, and for a moment the eyes meet across the water. It's strangely satisfying, like 2 animals sniffing noses before moving on. You can't help but think there's a mutual understanding there. We've both come far, and we both intend to keep going. You pass into a stretch where the banks vanish entirely, replaced by water and sky. The eyes are your only point of reference. Now, 2 fixed marks that remind you the boat knows its path, even if you can't see it. Nabat sits beside you, silent for once, watching the same view. He finally says, "This is where you let the eyes do the work." Joke 2. You think about how, in your own life, there are probably a few situations that could use a painted pair of eyes to handle things while you nap. As evening slides in, the delta hum changes. The river's broad voice mixes with the faint, deeper breath of the sea. It's not loud just enough to remind you that this water's story is about to merge with a bigger one. And whether the eyes on your prow are gods, charms, or just paint on wood, you're grateful they're still looking ahead. A line of pelicans crosses the sky in perfect formation. The eyes seem to follow them until the last wingtip fades into the growing dark. Then the prow settles its gaze back on the channel, leading you into waters where 2 worlds meet. The first sign of the trading port is not the buildings, but the smell ears of spice and smoke, tar and fish, mingled into something you could probably sell as Nile No. 5 if you bottled it. The felucca noses into a busy quay where ships of every size rub shoulders, broad-bellied cargo barges, nimble fishing skiffs, and the occasional deep-sea vessel with rigging so tall it seems to scrape the edge of the clouds. Every single one has eyes, and every set seems to have its own personality. You drift past a merchant boat loaded with amphorae. Its eyes are narrow, lined in red, as if concentrating on keeping those jars from toppling. Next is a squat fishing craft with round, almost cartoonish eyes, the pupils so big they seem permanently surprised. Then there's the long, lean grain barge, its eyes painted with crisp blue irises that shimmer under the sunlight like bits of sky stolen for the voyage. The crew begins tying up, and Nebat tells you this is one of the main hubs for spice and papyrus. Traders come here from Aprivor and down the coast, their holds packed with saffron, cinnamon, papyrus rolls, and textiles dyed in colors that look like they belong in a temple mural. The eyes work overtime here, he says. Too much wealth in one place. You need all the luck you can get. Mainstream fact, Egypt's river trade was as much about information as goods. Pilots swapped news about weather, politics, and markets as often as they exchanged cargo. In places like this, The eyes on a prow became both talisman and advertisement proof that you respected tradition and, by implication, the community that lived by it. Historians still argue whether there was a specific merchant style of eyes meant to signal trustworthiness. But the clustering of similar designs in port cities suggests at least a local fashion. As you walk along the dock, the scent of drying papyrus mixes with the sharper aroma of fish being salted for preservation. One trader gestures to his boat's eyes and boasts that they've never let him down in 20 years. You're about to ask whether he means that literally or figuratively when he adds, "A boat without eyes is like a trader without ears bound to miss something important." It's the kind of line that sounds rehearsed, but it sticks. You notice patterns in the way goods are loaded. Sacks of grain go midship, heavier amphorae near the stern. Fragile items in wicker baskets stowed under tarps at the bow right beneath. The painted gaze keeps the goods safe, a deckhand says, tapping the wood. Whether it's superstition or just a good excuse to keep fragile cargo up front, you can't tell. In one corner of the harbor, a pair of shipwrights are touching up the eyes on a vessel due to depart at dawn. They've added thin gold lines, radiating from the pupils like sunbursts. It's both pretty and a little intimidating, the way a lion's stare might be. Nabat explains that in trade ports, flashy designs aren't just for protection, they're competitive branding. If a buyer remembers your eyes, they'll remember your cargo. You pause at a small warehouse where bundles of cinnamon bark are stacked beside clay jars of honey. A clerk with ink-stained fingers is taking inventory, his reed pen scratching. Over a wax tablet, even here in the shade of the loading bay, you can see the prow of his employer's boat just beyond the door. The eyes glinting in the filtered light like a quiet reminder that the ship's watching the business as closely as the clerk does. Quirky tidbit. Some traders hang small charms shaped like eyes from the corners of their awnings or stall fronts, extending the ship's sight into the marketplace. You spot one dangling above a spice tabula bead of blue faience with a neat black dot twirling lazily in the breeze. The vendor catches you looking and says, "Keeps thieves honest." You don't ask how well it works, you just file it. Away is another small layer of the tradition. Historians still argue whether these decorative echoes on land were directly inspired by the boats or if they share an older, shared origin in household amulets. But standing here with the harbor's noise pressing in ropes, groaning, gulls crying, water slapping against wood, it feels like one continuous network of eyes. It's watching over both goods and gossip. The Falaka's captain calls you back on board. Nabat helps you over the gap, and you feel the slight roll of the hull as you land. The boat's eyes are now in line with a departing vessel stacked with jars of oil, its prow painted with a gaze so fierce you half expect it to shout orders. The two prows pass each other with a kind of silent acknowledgement, like rivals who know they'll meet again. As you push off from the dock, the harbor thins into smaller wharves, each quieter than the last. Traders wave from their decks, their eyes painted and human following your departure. Soon the noise of commerce fades behind you, replaced by the steady hush of water under the hull. You find yourself watching the horizon again, the eyes at the prow doing the same. There's comfort in that repetition, no matter how chaotic the port. The river always resumes its slower, steadier language spoken between boat and current. Gaze and destination. Joke 1. You realize the eyes are like the best shop security, silent, tireless, and with better hours than you'd ever agree to work. The sun dips toward the horizon, and the captain adjusts the sail for the evening wind. Ahead, the river stretches wide and calm, carrying you away from the bustle and into the long, steady reach toward open water or perhaps toward whatever port of call waits downriver. And always, at the very front, the eyes look ahead, unblinking, as if to say, "Trust me, I've seen it all before." The horizon is smudged with gray when you first notice it. Clouds gathering low and lazy like cats pretending they aren't about to pounce. The air thickens in a way you can feel in your teeth. A subtle pressure that makes the Falaka's timbers give the occasional creak. The painted eyes at the prow look as calm as ever, but the crew has shifted into a quieter gear. No idle jokes, fewer pauses in their work. A whisper runs through the deck, Kamsin, a dry wind, but in these parts, it can whip up choppy water. Even on the Nile, The captain glances at the sky, then at the eyes, and mutters something that sounds half like a prayer, half like a bargaining chip. Mainstream fact: storms on the Nile are usually short-lived, but can be brutal in their intensity. Sudden gusts can snap spars, drive vessels into sandbars, or swamp the smaller fishing boats. Historians still argue whether ancient crews performed specific rituals during storms. Some records suggest offerings of beer or bread tossed into the current. Others hint at chants meant to sharpen the boat's vision through its eyes. The crew trims the sail, bringing it down to a size that flaps like an impatient flag. You watch as Nebet ties off a rope with quick, practiced pulls, his eyes flicking forward between each knot. "They'll see us through," he says, not even glancing to clarify who they are. You both know he means the painted gaze. A ripple of wind strikes the boat, and the water shifts from glassy to ruffled in seconds. The smell of wet clay intensifies, mingled with something metallic in the air. You think about how unnerving it must have been for sailors in centuries past, when the horizon was your only forecast and the eyes on your prow were your only insurance. One of the younger crewmen moves forward, touching the prow's left eye with his fingertips. The gesture is quick, almost embarrassed, but you recognize it. The same way some people tap the doorway before leaving home. A quiet request for luck. Nabat catches you watching and grins. It's for balance, left for the river, right for the gods. Whether that's a widely held belief or just this crew's custom, you can't tell, but it's oddly comforting. The first fat drops of rain spatter against the deck, darkening the wood. The sail strains against its rigging, and the tiller shudders in the captain's grip. The eyes ahead seem almost brighter against the storm-dark sky, their black pupils fixed unwaveringly on the narrowing channel ahead. Quirky tidbit: some Egyptian sailors swore that if lightning struck within sight of the boat's eyes, it would blind them temporarily, so they divert the prow slightly during storms, just enough to avoid the god's full gaze. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic deflection or simply a way to angle the boat for safer handling in high wind. Either way, the image of a boat politely looking away from lightning is charming. The wind sharpens. Rain turns to a quick, slanted sheet. The river beneath you changes its voice from a gentle slap to a low, rushing hiss. Every few seconds, a wave smacks the hull with a force that rattles your ribs. And yet each time you glance forward, the eyes keep their calm vigil. They don't blink, they don't waver. If anything, the symmetry of their gaze makes the chaos feel slightly less personal. Nabat plants himself beside you, rain dripping from the edge of his headscarf. "It's not just about seeing," he shouts over the wind. "It's about being seen by whatever's out here." You think about that. In weather like this, maybe it's as much about telling the storm, "I'm here, I'm watching you," as it is about guidance. The crew moves like clockwork, hauling, tightening, leaning into the gusts. You join in where you can, holding a rope that bites your palms. The painted eyes are your one fixed point, the way a lighthouse might be at sea. You realize you've started glancing at them not just to reassure yourself, but to measure distance. The gap between where you stand and that unblinking gaze is your margin of safety. And then, it's almost as quickly as it began, the wind shifts again. The rain softens to a mist. The river flattens into long, dark ripples. The storm passes with the abrupt courtesy of someone excusing themselves from a conversation. The crew exhales in unison. Nabat pats the prow's right eye and says something in a language you don't know. But the tone is easy to translate. "Thank you." Joke 1. You consider doing the same, but decide you'd feel silly explaining to your friends back home that you've started thanking inanimate objects for weather management. As the clouds thin, a pale stripe of sunlight falls across the water. The eyes, freshly washed by the rain, gleam even more than they did this morning. The captain adjusts the sail, and the felucca slides back into its rhythm, heading for calmer reaches. Historians might debate the origins of the practice or the extent of its religious meaning, but here and now, after watching those eyes ride out a storm, you're convinced they have a kind of magic, whether it's in the paint or in the people who believe in it. And as the river widens again, the air, smelling faintly of wet papyrus, you can't help but trust them just a little more than you did before. Night has a way of folding over the Nile like a soft, heavy cloth, muting the edges of everything. The storm has moved on, leaving behind a sky polished clean, thick with stars. The felucca's sail hangs slack in the gentler breeze, and the crew's movements slow into quiet maintenance tasks, tying knots, checking the tiller, mending a loose seam. Somewhere aft, someone hums a low tune. It's almost lost to the creak of the hull. You're near the center of the deck, watching the reflection of the prow's painted eyes in the dark water. The ripples make them seem to blink slow, deliberate, as if the boat itself has shifted into a different kind of vision. Nebot drops beside you, holding a small clay lamp. He shields the flame with his palm, and the light throws the eyes into sharper relief against the night. This is when the stories come, he says, nodding toward the bow. Not the ones for the tourists. It's the ones for people who have to believe in something after dark. He begins with one you've never heard. Long ago, he says, the god come the potter of life fashioned a fleet of boats to ferry souls through the underworld. Each boat was given an eye, not for protection against storms, but so it could see the hidden paths between worlds. Some versions say the eyes could spot a soul's rightful place in the afterlife. Others claim they could stare down the demons that tried to drag passengers off course. Historians still argue whether these tales were local folklore or fragments of lost temple liturgy. But in the telling tonight, it hardly matters. The river around you is black glass, broken only by the occasional shiver of silver when a fish stirs. The eyes at the prow seem to float above it like twin moons. You can almost believe they're looking past the water entirely, into a place you can't follow. Nebot leans back, staring at the sky. My grandmother told me if you dream of a boat's eyes, it means you're being guided. Even if you think you're lost, you're not. The boat knows. He chuckles. Or it means you've spent too much time on the water and your brain's painting things for you. Joke 1. You silently hope your brain paints in something besides waterproof pigments. The captain joins you, carrying a small offering bowl. He kneels at the bow, sets the bowl just behind the eyes, and murmurs a few words you can't catch. Inside are scraps of bread and a thin trickle of beer. You glance at Nebet. For the river, he explains. So it knows we respect its night. Patrols. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found small ceramic bowls like this in riverbank deposits, sometimes with traces of bread and beer still clinging to the inside. Whether they were true offerings or just refused from a meal is debated, but after seeing this, you can imagine both being true at once. The boat's motion slows further as the current evens out. The crew begins to settle in for the night, rolling out thin mats, finding corners of the deck to claim. Nebot tells one more story before sleep is strange. Meandering thing about a boat whose eyes were stolen by thieves and had to make the journey home blind. The river, he says, felt sorry for it and carried it back on the gentlest of currents. When the eyes were repainted, the boat saw more clearly than before. It's about forgiveness, he adds, though you think it might also be about keeping a backup set of paint on hand. You lie back, using a coil of rope as a pillow. The stars overhead spill in dizzying numbers, mirrored faintly in the water. The eyes are a darker shadow against the starlit river, steady and patient. You wonder if the crew dreams of them, if, in some subconscious way, the gaze travels with them even when they're not aboard. Nebot drifts off mid-sentence. His last words something about watching the moon in their pupils. You stay awake a while longer, letting the hum of the river seep into you. Somewhere far downstream, a temple bell rings twice. The eyes don't move, but you can almost imagine them listening. Historians still argue whether the spiritual associations of boat eyes were formalized religion or sailors' folklore that happened to stick. You think of the captain's offering, of Nebot's underworld tale, of the grandmother's dream omen. They feel connected not by doctrine, but by the human need to trust something when the world is dark. When your eyes finally close, the last thing you see is the prow's gaze reflecting in the black water. It's unblinking, unhurried, a reminder that even in the deepest night, you are not traveling alone. Dawn lifts like a curtain, and the river becomes a runway. Long and gleaming, leading you toward a horizon that finally stops pretending to be gentle. You feel the change first in your feet planks that used to cradle, now bounce a little under. The swell, as if the Faleka is testing her sea legs before you've even reached the sea. The night's stories still hum in your head, but the painted eyes are already wide awake, fixed on a brighter, harder line of light ahead, where the Nile loosens its grip and the Mediterranean begins. The air tastes different, less clay.
More.
Bite, the reeds thin, the banks pull away, and the channels braid into a wide, shimmering mouth. A pilot from the Delta clambers aboard, his hair salted by a lifetime of crosswinds, touches 2 fingers to the prow's left eye. For the river, he says. He taps the right eye. For the sea. It's a small ritual, but it feels like a passport stamp. 2 worlds acknowledging each other on your behalf. Mainstream fact to steady your nerves. Egyptians were not strangers to the Mediterranean. Cedar from the Levant, copper from Cyprus. Wine and oil and resin, these moved by hull and sail long before maps pretended the sea could be tamed. Rivercraft hugged the mouths. Deeper, broader ships took the swells, their timbers stitched with lashings, their prows staring down weather and worry alike. The first swell rolls under you, and the Faleka gives a startled little hop, like a cat. Remembering water exists, Nabat laughs, but he ties the spare line twice, then a 3rd time, because jokes are better when the knots are confident. You glance at the eyes. They seem pleased. Or maybe that's just paint being reflective and you being suggestible. Either way, you stand a little broader, knees soft, because posture is also a kind of prayer. Where river ends and sea begins is not a line, it's a blending. The water shifts from brown-green to slate-blue. Sound deepens, trading whisper. For breath, then breath for bass. Wind rises with purpose, and the sail answers with a low, satisfied thrum. You pass a floating tree trunk and catch yourself waiting to see if it sprouts. Crocodile teeth memory, playing pranks, but out here, the old neighbors stay upstream. Joke 1. You mentally send the crocodiles a postcard, wish you weren't. Here, the pilot calls for a bearing you can't translate, but the captain obeys without squinting. Together they point the prow through the last tangle of bars and tongues of sand that want very badly to introduce themselves to your keel. The eyes do not blink. They were painted for this forward, always forward, and you discover that your own breathing has adopted their rhythm, in and out like a long, slow stroke of oars you don't have. Then the Nile is behind you, not as a departure, but as a scent, sweetness on the wind that falls away. And the Mediterranean spreads its blue, grammar in every direction. The swell is modest but definite, the deck rising and lowering underfoot with the polite insistence of a teacher. Far ahead, a triangle of canvas shins another ship. Another 2. And there, darker and lower, a hull scudding across your path. Like a beetle as the day brightens, the sea fills with strangers you half expected. A long, lean vessel with oars and a single square sail slides past on a crossing tack Greek. If the crew's shouted vowels and the sharp-angled eyes are anything to go by, their pupils are big, outlined in a fierce black that would be at home on a pot as much as a prow. They give you a lookboat to boat eye to eye that sits somewhere between greeting and appraisal. You don't share a language, but the eyes do. We see the same waves. May your planks hold. Soon after, a broad-bellied merchant from the Levant lumbers by, decks stacked with amphorae held in a wooden grid. Its eyes are generous, almost owlish, edged with red that flashes when the bow rises. A sailor on her foredeck salutes with the easy arrogance of someone who has survived a dozen capes and keeps count for fun. He points at your freshly painted gaze and grins a compliment in maritime shorthand. Quirky tidbit that feels truer after 5 minutes of swells. Sailors carry garlic to chew when the sea gets uppity. Keeps the belly calm, Nabat insists. Handing you a clove with the seriousness of a priest, you try it and decide the real magic is that no one will come close enough to see you turn green. He also knots a tiny bundle of dried mint to the shroud. When it rattles, he claims, the wind remembers to behave. You are unconvinced but charmed. The best place to stand in a storm is often between belief and rope. Historians still argue whether Egyptian seagoing ships consistently wore the same eye design as riverboats, or weather captains commissioned sharper or predatory styles for the open water. Fragments suggest both traditions, with regional flourishes, some pupils ringed in blue to flatter the sea, some with lash marks like a falcon's to flatter the gods. Out here, the variance looks like dialect, not disagreement, different ways of saying look ahead. A swell larger than the rest nudges the bow, and you get your first real taste of the sea's humor. It lifts you, waits for your gratitude, then sets you down a little crooked, just to see if you're paying attention. The crew laughs as you adjust your stance. The eyes never acknowledge the joke. They have the fixed politeness of a very patient host. Joke 2. You privately apologize to your land legs for this surprise. Performance review. By midday, the water is sapphire under a white-hot dome, and a breeze with teeth scours the last river cling from your clothes. On the horizon, a vessel with 2 masts sails like a modest city block tipped on its side. As it draws near, you see talismans strung from her rigging shells, bone beads, something that looks suspiciously like a tiny painted eye dangling where the stays meet. Even the seaborne bring watchfulness with them. The habit travels better than cargo. You pass within hailing distance. There are grins, arm waves, a cup lifted in your direction. A boy on their deck points at your prow and mimics peering through narrowed lids, as if to ask how well your eyes can see. Nebet cups his hands and calls back a line you don't understand, but the laughter that follows is fluent enough. For half a minute, the boats slide alongside like old friends on parallel streets, and the eyes yours and theirs hold each other the way lanterns do at dusk. Steady, companionable, a promise that someone else is also awake. The afternoon ripens. The pilot takes his payment and a small loaf for luck, then hops back into his skiff to shepherd another river child to sea. Your captain adjusts the yard a finger width. The felucca purrs. You sip water that tastes faintly of clay and sky and think about how much of sailing is simply consenting to be taught over and over by things larger than you. The eyes, for all their insistence, are humble in that way. They don't claim to conquer. They claim to witness. A flash of silver erupts off the bowfish schooling, turning as one body. For a second, the painted pupils seem to track them, a hunter's reflex caught in lacquer. You smile. The underworld stories from last night feel nearer on open water.
Ass!
As if the boundary between what's practical and what's myth prefers a rolling floor. You remember the cat in the dockyard? Unimpressed by ceremony? You wish she were here to manage the horizon as well as she managed brushes. Joke 3. If cats could captain, all voyages would end exactly when they felt like it. By late day, the light fattens, gold leaning toward peach, and a line of low coast smudges the western edge, a roadstead perhaps, or just sandbanks pretending to be one. The captain decides to keep an offshore track until morning. Let the eyes earn their supper, he says gently, which you translate as, we trust what we can see, and we trust what we've painted to help us see a little farther. You settle. On the foredeck, as the sun flattens into the water, the pupils hold the last bright coin of light until it slips, and then they keep holding nothing, which is sometimes the point. The sea breathes under you with the contentment of a beast that has decided you are not worth swatting. The river is a scent behind, the night a silk scarf ahead, and between them the eyes perform their endless, tireless task. Look, and let their looking calm the hands that hold the ropes. When darkness gathers, your world compresses to the creak of wood, the hiss of wake, the faint salt on your lips, and the steady company of 2 painted companions who have learned. Across cultures and centuries, the simple diplomacy of attention. River to sea, stranger to stranger, god to boatman, and back again the gaze holds.
House.
And in that holding, you feel the map redraw itself inside you. Fear shrinks, distance shortens, and forward becomes a place you can inhabit. Time has a strange way of speeding up at sea and slowing down on the river. But here on the edge between them, bit feels suspended, like the felucca is hanging from the wind rather than riding it. The horizon remains wide and empty, a thin seam between water and sky, and the painted eyes at the prow hold their steady vigil. They've seen the river's soft mornings, the delta's shifting moods, the sea's sharper bite. Now, in your mind's eye, they're seeing something else entirely, a slow vanishing. Nabat is the first to speak it aloud. Fewer eyes now, he says. He doesn't mean this voyage. He means the years. Not every boat bothers anymore. Let the words settle. It's true some of the ships you've passed lately, especially the newer ones, have bare prows. Smooth, unmarked wood as if the tradition had never existed. Mainstream fact, by the late Ptolemaic and Roman periods, some Egyptian shipbuilding adopted foreign aesthetic sleeker lines, different rigging, prows carved without the old protective gaze. Historians still argue whether this was due to cultural blending, changing beliefs, or simple practicality. Paint wears off. Carved eye takes time. New owners might not care for old symbols. But the result was the same, a slow fading of a tradition that had watched the Nile for centuries. You try to picture the river without them, and the image feels less alive. The eyes weren't just decoration, they were conversation. Without them, the boats look mute. Nabat tells you of a trader he once knew who stripped the eyes from his vessel after a Roman official mocked them as childish. The trader claimed the change made no difference, but within a year, the boat had grounded twice and lost a cargo to thieves. Bad luck, the man called it. Nabat shakes his head. Or maybe the river didn't recognize him anymore. Squall passes in the distance, rain dragging a gray veil across the water. The felucca skirts it easily. But you can't help imagining how those bare-prowed ships face storms without even the comfort of a painted stare. You've seen firsthand how the eyes steady a crew, how they give a focal point in weather and weather. In calm, remove them, and you remove that anchor in the mind. Quirky tidbit, in some fishing villages, old boat eyes were cut from retired hulls and nailed to the doors of houses for protection. You've spotted a few in passing flaking paint. Cracked wood, but still recognizable. Historians debate whether these were true talismans or simply sentimental keepsakes. To you, they seem like both, relics of a tradition trying to outlive the boats themselves. The captain joins you at the bow. When I was a boy, he says, every boat had them, even the rafts made of palm logs. Now he gestures at the empty water ahead. Now they are just another expense. His tone isn't bitter. There's a weight in it, the sound of something quietly slipping away. You glance at the eyes on your own prow. The paint still fresh from the dockyard. The small dot of Egyptian blue catching the afternoon sun. They look back at you, or at least it feels that way, and you think about the centuries they've bridged. From the first reed boats painted to please river spirits, to the merchant ships that crossed into foreign harbors, to now when the tradition has to survive on the stubbornness of captains who, remember, historians still argue whether the decline was inevitable in a world of changing trade routes and ship designs. Some point out that protective symbols simply moved elsewhere. Amulets worn by crew or carved into the masthead instead of painted on the hull. Others lament the loss as a break in continuity, a line of sight interrupted. Nabat, watching your face, grins. Don't worry. Some things don't vanish completely. They just hide. He tells you about a fisherman in the Fayoum who paints. His boat's eyes only on the inside of the prow, so they can see without being seen. It's half rebellion, half preservation, a private conversation between boat and water, kept safe from mockery or neglect. Joke 1. You imagine explaining to a Roman inspector that your boat isn't superstitious, it's just a little introverted. The day wanes. The sea is flattened, the wind gone soft, and the felucca makes easy progress. You find yourself lingering at the bow more often now, as if trying to memorize the exact expression of these eyes before time erases. Too many others like them? By sunset, the water is copper, and the clouds are brushed in pink. The captain rests a hand on the prow, fingers tracing the black outline. When I'm gone, he says, they'll probably sand this down. He doesn't sound angry, just resigned. But until then, they will look, and they will see. Words stay with you long after the light fades. And you realize that in this moment, the eyes are not just watching ahead, they're holding the past in their gaze too. Morning returns with a different accent, the vowels of gulls and the consonants of diesel. You step from memory into the present with hardly a ripple. Soles hitting a concrete key that smells like sun-warmed salt, engine oil, and yesterday's. Catch. Nets bloom in heaps, plastic floats clack like lazy beads, and a radio near a tea stall competes with boat horns in a cheerful argument no one intends to win. Ahead, a small forest of prows points toward the mouth of the harbor, and there, they are eyes. Bright, proud, unabashedly modern, gazing over crates of sardines and stacks of blue. Buckets as if nothing important has changed at all. You wander past skiffs painted in jubilant stripes tomato red. Nile green, a blue so saturated it seems. Two hum. The eyes at their bows are exuberant cousins of the ones you've sailed with. Thick black outlines, white sclera glowing, some with sky blue irises.
Us.
Others with little gold lashes. On one boat, the painter has added a wink. Just a tiny upward nick at the corner that makes the whole prow look as if it has a secret. On another, the eyes were eyeliner sharp enough to cut rope. You grin. The tradition has clearly learned a few new tricks. Mainstream fact. Wearing its work boots in Egyptian fishing towns today, long the Mediterranean from Alexandria to Damietta, and around the lakes of the Delta many boats still carry protective eyes and other talismans. Evil eye beads dangle from canopies. Hand-painted wedget symbols squat happily beside registration numbers. You can stand here with your tea and watch 3,000 years compress into one bright dab of pigment. A fisherman in rubber boots. And a Galilea taps the prow of his boat with 2 fingers before casting off. Left, then right. Reflex. You could swear you've seen that gesture before. Can you have back on the felucca, back on the dockyard plank? Left for the river, right for the sea? You murmur, hears you and laughs, pleased to have met. A co-conspirator. And a little extra for the inspector, he adds, patting the middle like a joke tax. Joke 1? You consider adding a 3rd tap for whoever invented early mornings. But he is already busy with ropes, a boy offers. To sell you an eye bead for luck? Real fiance, he insists, though the plastic sheen gives him away. He doesn't blink, and neither do you. Luck is sometimes about the buying, not the bead. He points to a trawler where a whole gallery of symbols marches along the gunwale. Fish, crescent moon, a football club logo, and gestu, enormous. Eyes. He wins the sardines, the boy declares, with the authority of 9 years and a perfect sales pitch. You lean close to a small wooden skiff while its owner sands yesterday's scuffs from the paint. The eyes here are simple and direct, like a frank handshake. He explains that he repaints them each year after the maintenance haul out, same outline, same white, same dot of blue in the corner for the sky's blessing. His father taught him the recipe, and his daughter can already draw the outline without looking. Some things, he says, don't ask for permission to continue. They just do. The harbor thins into a neighborhood of workshops, and you duck into a shed where a sign in marker pen reads, "We make boats see." Inside. The old choreography returns: pigment bowls, brushes chewed to a sympathetic point. The sweet pine tang of resin. Only the music has changed. A tinny speaker exhales a pop ballad while a painter outlines. A fresh pair of pupils with the same concentration you watched in the dockyard centuries earlier tells you the most requested. Style now is bold and friendly. People want their luck to look approachable, he says. No angry eyes. Fish prefer polite company. Joke 2. You picture a sardine reading Yelp reviews. 5 stars. Very friendly gaze. Would swim near again. On a nearby slipway, a bigger boat sits as if in a bath. Her eyes are flanked by stickers, company phone number, a QR code that promises fast ice, and the ubiquitous football emblem. The painter has threaded the old and the new together with grace. A thin line of blue rings, each pupil, a tiny flick of gold at the inner corner catches the sun. For long life, he explains, and good fuel prices. You respect the ambition. Historians still argue whether this modern persistence is an unbroken line of belief or a revivified habit eased along by tourism, nostalgia, and social media? Is the eye today the same prayer it once was? Or has it become a brand of belonging evidence that you're part of a coastal fraternity that knows the old passwords? The debate sways like the boats themselves, watching a skipper kiss his fingers and touch the paint before backing into the channel. You vote quietly for both. A symbol that survives because it keeps doing two jobs will likely keep its berth. You pass a kiosk where a woman sells hooks, float lights, and tiny blue bead amulets. She threads one onto a thin nylon line for a customer and ties it to the canopy strut. When the breeze hits, it clicks against the aluminum with a shy chime. "So the wind remembers to be kind," she says, which is almost word for word what Nebet swore about mint at sea. You smile at the echo-belief traveling light, changing its shoes but not its route. Quirky tidbit nested in the present. A few captains here have begun painting miniature eyes on the inside of the bow, hidden from passersby but visible to anyone working the foredeck. For the crew, one man shrugs. Sometimes the sea needs less convincing than we do. It's the private version of the old practice from the Fayum you heard about, a superstition turned inward for morale. And if you've ever stared at a screen before a big day and whispered, "Please behave," you recognize the mechanics immediately. Across the water, a high-sided trawler throttles up, her wake shouldering against the quay. She's all steel and rivets, but even she has eyes sprayed on in a brisk stencil. Industrial, but unmistakable. Joke 3. You imagine them pushing up a tiny steel bridge of a nose to squint at the weather. A teenager on deck tosses a coil of rope and, without breaking stride, reaches out to tap the starboard eye. Habit is faster than thought. The morning warms. The harbor begins its daily migration from busy to busier. You sit on a bollard sipping tea from a thin glass and watch the conversation continue. Eyes on prows, greeting eyes on stalls, amulets. Winking from awnings, human glances threading it all together. It's strangely restful, this continuity in motion. You think of the captain who once said the eyes don't conquer? They witness. They witness ice deliveries and tide charts, family arguments over net repairs, the first rush of goals. When a hold opens, they witness ordinary luck-not storms and Faroes, but the smaller weather of a working day. Some boats pull out, reversing with the slow, practiced confidence of people who've memorized the harbor in all its moods. Others arrive, bump fenders, and begin to unload. If you close your eyes, the soundtrack is ancient tropes over wood, water against hulls, barter voiced in vowels long enough to stretch across centuries. When you open them, the pupils are still there, bright and blunt as ever, paying out an old reassurance. Forward has an ally. You stand to go, and because it seems right, tap the nearest prow lightly. Then right. Paint yields the faintest tacky warmth to your fingertips. You don't ask for anything specific. You just thank the gaze for finding its way into this century wearing new colors and old promises. As you step back into the bustle, the boat looks past you, toward the channel, and you follow its line like a compass you can feel rather than read. The day has leaned into evening by the time you find yourself back on the water, this time in a small hired boat that rocks just enough to keep you alert. The harbor behind you glows with sodium lights, a constellation tethered to Earth, while ahead the channel stretches into a mirror of fading gold. The eyes on your prow are smaller than those you've sailed with before, no more than a hand's breadth from corner to corner, but they are crisp and confident. Freshly painted in black and white with a neat dot of blue at each inner edge, the oarsman rows in long, even strokes. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, it's to tell you his grandfather also painted eyes on his boats, said they let you borrow the river's vision for the night. You glance at the water, already turning to ink, and decide that's a kind of borrowing worth doing. The channel narrows, banks drawing closer, shadows from palms spilling over the surface like brushstrokes. The eyes ahead seem to drink in the last scraps of light, their gaze fixed firmly forward. There's no hurry in their stare. It's the same unblinking calm that's accompanied you since that first morning aprivor. Mainstream fact. The ancient practice of painting eyes on boats spanned thousands of years, surviving floods, dynasties, invasions, and shifting religious landscapes. Its persistence was not just about magic or art. It was about human habit. The comfort of repeating a gesture your parents and grandparents trusted. Historians still argue over its precise origin story, but few dispute its endurance. As the current carries you past the last curve, the water opens into a still backwater, quiet except for the faint lap against the hull. The oarsman rests, letting the boat drift. He points toward a weathered vessel moored at the far end, half sunk into the mud. The wood is bleached, the planks warped, but you can still see them, two faded eyes. One nearly gone, the other holding on with a stubborn patch of white and a faint black outline. That one, he says softly, was my grandfather's. You both watch it a moment longer. Even in ruin, the gaze remains. Quirky tidbit. Some fishermen believe the eyes keep working even after the boat is retired, guarding the stretch of water where it rests. Yes. Whether that's faith or fondness, it feels right. You think of the prow as a lighthouse for fishers who know where to look. Stare, a landmark of memory. The light goes peach, then mauve, then the deep blue that hides the horizon. The oarsman turns you back toward the harbor, and the smaller eyes on your own bow catch the glow of shore lights, making them appear briefly alive. They guide you past moored skiffs between slow-moving barges, to the gentle clamor of dockside voices and gulls. Joke 1. You wonder if the eyes are slightly smug at having navigated you home without a single detour, though you did most of the rowing. The boat nudges against the dock and you step out, leaving the eyes to their watch. You think about all the ones you've seen bright and bold in a modern fishing port, carved in memory on ancient barges, half hidden on the inside of a bow, sun-faded on a vessel no longer seaworthy. They've been protectors, guides, negotiators, brand marks, and quiet companions. They've been more than pigment. They've been a language. The oarsman offers a parting nod. Eyes open, he says, and it sounds like both a farewell and advice. You walk along the quay until the water is a long, dark sheet beside you, broken only by ripples and the reflection of lights. The smell of the sea mixes with the warmth of grilled bread from a nearby stall. Somewhere out beyond what you can see, boats move along black water, their painted pupils taking in the night without a flicker. You stop once, just before leaving the dock, and glance back. A single prow is pointed in your direction. You can't tell which boat it belongs to, but the eyes are clear even in the dark. They are watching, as they always have, and for reasons you can't quite explain that feels like permission to keep. Going now, the night has truly settled, the harbor sounds slipping into softer shapes. The clink of rope on wood becomes a lullaby, the shuffle of water against hulls a slow, steady breath. Right. Out across the dark expanse. Those painted eyes, whether bright with fresh pigment or pale with age, are still open, still keeping their quiet vigil. You picture them scattered along the riverbanks, moored in sheltered coves, rocking gently at anchorages. Some gaze at the moon's reflection, others stare into water dark enough to hide their own image. It doesn't matter. The act of looking is enough. Your own breath begins to match the water's, rhythm slow in, slower out. In your mind's ear, the creak of timber softens into the steady hum of a boat drifting at ease. The air is cool, carrying a trace of salt, and the faint, sweet scent of wood, warmed by a day in the sun. Even the stories seem to relax now, stretching themselves out like cats in the warmth. The arguments of historians, the quirks of sailors, the layered meanings of protection and pride, they all fade into one simple image. A boat, a river, and two calm eyes, fixed on whatever lies ahead. You let that image drift closer until it's all you see. No urgency, no destination, just the gentle forward pull of water and the promise that something, whether magic, tradition, or the steady hand of time, will keep watch. So you let go of the dock in your mind, feel the boat sway under you, and let the current carry you. The eyes are open, the way is clear. The river, in its long memory, has decided to be kind tonight. Sleep well.